Jack sat in his small, dimly lit quarters on the research outpost, staring out the window at the dark sky beyond. His mind was occupied with thoughts of the mission, the research, and the tasks that never seemed to end. It was quiet here, almost. Too quiet. The planet they were stationed on was a remote one, located on the edge of the galaxy, far from Earth. The outpost was home to a few dozen scientists, soldiers, and researchers who were all focused on studying the strange phenomena. In the area, he had been warned about Lyra, the alien girl who had been assigned to stay with him during the upcoming pairing season. She was from a species known for their intelligence, beauty, and unique biological processes. Jack had heard the rumors about her kind how during the pairing season. Their instincts took over, pushing them to seek out a mate. But Jack had brushed it off. He wasn't one to believe in rumors. Besides, he had his work to focus on, and he didn't have time for distractions. Lyra had arrived just 2 days ago. She was tall, with long silver hair that shimmered in the light, and her eyes were a vibrant shade of blue that seemed to change with the light. Her alien features were striking, and Jack couldn't help but be drawn to her, though he didn't let it show. He had a job to do, and the last thing he needed was to get distracted by an alien girl, no matter how beautiful she was. The first day she had arrived, Jack had met her briefly in the corridor. She was quiet, reserved, and polite, almost too polite. He had noticed that she seemed to avoid eye contact, and she spoke in soft, measured tones. There was an air of mystery about her that intrigued him, but he didn't dwell on it. After all, she was just another member of the crew, and it was his responsibility to make sure everything ran smoothly. However, as the days passed, Jack couldn't help but feel the tension growing. There was something about Lyra that he couldn't shake. Her presence seemed to fill the room, and whenever she was near, Jack felt an unease he couldn't explain. It wasn't that she was doing anything wrong, but there was an intensity about her that made him feel uncomfortable. It was as if she was always watching him, waiting for something. The warnings from his fellow officers echoed in his mind. "You better be careful with her," one of them had said. "She's in pairing season, and it's not something you want to ignore." Jack had chuckled at the time, dismissing it as just another piece of alien lore. After all, how could someone so beautiful be a threat? He had seen the way she interacted with the other crew members, calm, respectful, and professional. There was nothing about her that seemed dangerous to Dot yet. As the days wore on, he began to notice small things. The way she would look at him for just a moment too long, the way her voice would soften when she spoke to him, the way her scent lingered in the air after she left the room. Jack shook his head, trying to focus on his work, but it was becoming harder to ignore. He had never been the type to dwell on things like this, but there was something about Lyra that made him question everything. He tried to convince himself that it was just the stress of the job, that he was overthinking things. But deep down, he knew there was something more. Something that he couldn't understand, and it made him uneasy. Lyra was beautiful, yes, but there was something else about her. Something that felt alien in a way he couldn't describe. That evening, after a long day of work, Jack made his way back to his quarters. As he entered the room, he saw Lyra sitting on the bed, looking out the window. She turned to face him as he stepped inside, her eyes meeting his for the first time in days. "Good evening, Jack," she said softly, her voice like music, but there was something in her gaze that made his heart race. "Good evening, Lyra," he replied, his voice steady despite the sudden tightness in his chest. He tried to ignore the flutter of nerves in his stomach. "How are you settling in?" She smiled, a faint, mysterious smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "I am fine," she said. "Thank you for your hospitality." There was a moment of silence between them, and Jack felt the weight of her gaze on him. It was as if she could see straight through him, reading every thought, every emotion. It made him uncomfortable, but at the same time it intrigued him. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice sounding a little more unsure than he intended. Lyra's smile faded slightly, and for the first time, she seemed to hesitate. Yes, she said slowly, but there is something I must tell you. Something important. Jack raised an eyebrow. What's that? Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, he felt as though time had stopped. You must be careful, Jack, she said softly. The pairing season is near, and it is not something you can ignore. Jack blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Pairing season? He asked, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. I've heard about it, but she cut him off gently. It is a time when our instincts become stronger, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It is a time when we seek out those who can help us fulfill our biological need. And for me, that time is coming soon. Jack felt a wave of unease wash over him, but he still didn't fully understand. And what does that mean for me? He asked, his voice steady despite the sudden nervousness creeping up his spine. Lyra stood up, her tall frame almost towering over him. It means you must be cautious, she said, her tone low and serious. Our instincts are not something we can control completely, and it would be unwise to ignore them. Jack swallowed hard, trying to process her words. I'll be careful, he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. Lyra gave him a final lingering look before turning toward the door. I hope you will, Jack. I hope you will. As she left the room, Jack stood frozen in place, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been warned, and now it was too late to turn back. He knew he should have locked the door that night, but now, it was a mistake he would have to live with. Jack couldn't shake off Lyra's words. They echoed in his mind all night long. He had been warned, but he hadn't taken it seriously. Now as he lay awake in his bed, the silence of his quarters seemed heavier than usual. The hum of the outpost machinery and the distant sound of wind outside did nothing to calm his racing thoughts. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Lyra had looked at him, the way her voice had dropped low as she spoke about her species' pairing season. Was it really that serious? Could it really be as dangerous as she made it seem? Jack tried to reason with himself, but a nagging feeling at the back of his mind told him that he had underestimated it. He had always been the cautious type, but this was different. This wasn't just a normal warning, it felt urgent. It felt like something more. The next morning, Jack decided to do what he should have done the night before. He locked his door. It seemed like the simplest thing to do, but for some reason, it felt like the first time he had really taken the situation seriously. As he stood in the small, sterile hallway outside his quarters, Jack couldn't help but glance toward Lyra's room. She hadn't said much since their conversation the night before. She had simply left, leaving him with more questions than answers. He had seen her on the way to the mess hall earlier that morning. Her silver hair had been pulled back in a simple braid, and her eyes had avoided his. She was distant, almost, like she was shutting him out, and that made Jack feel worse. Had he done something wrong? Was she angry with him for not taking her seriously? When he finally sat down for breakfast, he found himself picking at his food, distracted by the events of the previous night. The other crew members chatted around him, but Jack didn't hear most of what they were saying. His mind kept returning to Lyra and the warning she had given him. Hey Jack, you all right? It was Mark, one of the officers stationed at the outpost. He had been Jack's friend for years, and he always seemed to know when something was bothering him. Jack looked up, realizing that Mark had been talking to him for a few moments. Yeah, I'm fine, Jack said, though it came out sounding a bit forced. Mark didn't buy it. You sure? You've been acting kind of distracted today. Jack hesitated for a moment before deciding to be honest. It's Lyra, he said. She warned me about something. Something called the pairing season. She said I need to be careful. Mark's expression shifted. Pairing season, he said, his tone now more serious. She's right to warn you. It's not something to take lightly. The pheromones they give off during that time. They're powerful, Jack. It messes with your head. Makes it hard to think clearly. Jack frowned. So it's as bad as she says? Mark nodded. Worse, probably. Those aliens, especially her species, they can't really control it. It's instinct. They've got no choice in the matter. But that doesn't make it any easier to handle. You've got to be careful, very careful. Jack sat back in his chair, feeling a wave of unease wash over him. He had thought it was just some strange alien custom, something that didn't apply to him. But now, hearing Mark's words, he realized how little he really knew. I didn't think it would be a big deal, Jack admitted. I thought it was just, one of those things. Like a warning that didn't really mean much. Mark gave him a sympathetic look. It's easy to brush it off. But when you're dealing with something like this, it's better to be safe than sorry. Trust me. Jack nodded, his thoughts racing. He had to be more careful. He had to take the situation seriously. Especially if he was going to be around Lyra for the next few weeks. He couldn't afford to ignore the warning. Not anymore. The rest of the day passed slowly for Jack. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, half expecting Lyra to appear at any moment. His mind kept wandering back to the night before, to the way she had stood so close to him, her eyes full of something he couldn't quite understand. Was it desire? Was that what the pairing season did to them? Or was it something else? By the time the evening rolled around, Jack's nerves were on edge. He made sure to lock his door before settling in for the night, but despite his precautions, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. He tried to read a book, but the words on the page blurred as his mind wandered. He tried to focus on anything but the thought of Lyra, but it was impossible. At some point, Jack drifted off to sleep, but it wasn't a restful sleep. His dreams were filled with flashes of Lyra's face, her eyes looking at him in a way that made his heart race. He woke up suddenly, drenched in sweat, his breath coming in short gasps. It was dark in his room. The only sound was the soft hum of the outposts. Machinery. But as Jack sat up in his bed, he felt a strange presence in the room. It wasn't just the usual stillness. It felt different, like someone else was there. His heart skipped a beat. He turned slowly, looking toward the door, and then he saw her. Lyra stood at the entrance to his room, her figure framed by the dim light from the hallway. Her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and for a moment, Jack couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He just stared at her, his mind racing. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, her gaze locked on him, her expression unreadable. "I told you to be careful, Jack," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the tension in the room grew. He realized, in that moment, how much he had underestimated the situation. The pairing season wasn't just some distant custom, it was real. It was happening now, and he had no idea what would happen next. Jack couldn't believe what he was seeing. Lyra stood there in the doorway, her figure glowing faintly in the dim light. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just standing there for no reason. She had come for a purpose. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Lyra," he repeated, his voice cracking a little. "What are you doing here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a step closer to him, her movements slow and deliberate. Jack felt a wave of panic rise in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had been warned. He had locked the door, but somehow she had still managed to get inside. He had thought he was being careful. "You were warned, Jack," she said softly, her voice filled with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "I can't control it, I can't stop it." Jack felt his heart race as the air in the room seemed to grow thicker. His instincts screamed at him to back away, but something kept him rooted to the spot. He wasn't sure what was happening, whether it was fear or something else entirely, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from her. Lyra's eyes were locked on his, and her gaze was almost hypnotic. He could feel her presence, the weight of it pressing in on him from all sides. It was as if the rest of the world had faded away, and there was only the two of them in the room, caught in a moment that neither of them could escape. "I'm sorry," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but the pairing season, it changes everything. It makes us act on instinct." Jack took a deep breath, his mind spinning. He had known that the pairing season was coming, but he hadn't understood the full weight of it. He hadn't understood how powerful their instincts could be. He had thought he could handle it, but now with Lyra standing so close to him, the reality was impossible to ignore. He stepped back, his mind racing. "Lyra, please," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You have to leave." "You can't," she stepped forward, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Before Jack could react, she reached out and placed her hand on his chest. Her touch was gentle, but there was a pressure behind it, a force that made it impossible for him to move. "I can't leave, Jack," she said, her voice low, almost pleading. "I need you. My instincts need you." Jack's breath caught in his throat as he felt the heat of her touch spread through him. His mind screamed at him to resist, to push her away, but his body refused to listen. The way she looked at him, the way she spoke, it was like nothing he had ever experienced before. For the first time in his life, Jack felt completely out of control. He had always been the one who followed the rules, who kept things in order. But now, in this moment, everything was spinning out of control. I don't know what to do," Jack whispered, his voice shaking. Lyra's expression softened, and for a moment, she seemed almost vulnerable. "You don't have to do anything, Jack," she said, her voice a little steadier now. "You just have to let me be close to you, that's all." Jack stared at her, torn between what his mind was telling him and what his body was screaming. He could feel her warmth radiating through him, and the scent of her, something sweet and intoxicating, seemed to fill the room. Every instinct in his body told him to stay away, but his body was betraying him. He wanted to pull back, to push her away, but there was something in her gaze, something that made it impossible for him to move. The more he tried to resist, the stronger the pull became. "I don't want to hurt you," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the fear and confusion mixing together in a way he had never experienced before. Lyra shook her head slowly, her fingers still resting on his chest. "You won't hurt me, Jack. You couldn't." She stepped even closer, and now they were so close that Jack could feel her breath on his skin. "I just need you to understand, Jack. This is not about us. It's about what I am, what I need." Jack's mind was spinning. His body was reacting in ways he didn't fully understand, and his thoughts were a blur. But he knew one thing: he was in over his head. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated the power of the pairing season. "You have to go," Jack said, his voice more forceful this time. "Please, you have to leave." But Lyra didn't move. She looked at him with something almost like regret in her eyes, but it was mixed with a deep need. "I can't go, Jack," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't. Not when I feel like this. Not when I need you this much." For a moment, there was silence between them. Jack could feel the tension crackling in the air, like something was about to break. His body was still frozen, trapped in the pull of Lyra's presence. But his mind was screaming for him to do something, anything to stop this. Finally, Jack took a deep breath and stepped back. "I can't do this," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You need to leave now." Lyra's face fell, and for the first time, she looked truly conflicted. "I didn't want to force you into this, Jack, but I can't fight it anymore." Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped toward the door, unlocking it. He turned back to Lyra one last time. "You need to leave, please, before things go too far." Lyra hesitated for a moment, her eyes filled with something that Jack couldn't quite understand. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Jack standing there, his heart racing in his chest. Jack stood there for a long moment, trying to calm his breathing. He had narrowly avoided disaster, but he knew the danger wasn't over. The pairing season was far from over, and now, more than ever, he knew he had to be careful. The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt truly alone. But even as he locked the door behind him again, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were only just beginning. The days after Lyra's visit were difficult for Jack. Every time he saw her, his heart would race, and his mind would spiral into confusion. He had managed to push her away the night she came to his room, but it was harder than he expected. Lyra's presence lingered in his thoughts, and every encounter seemed to leave him feeling more and more unsettled. He couldn't ignore the pull, the tension between them. Jack tried to focus on his duties at the outpost, but it was almost impossible. The research tasks he had once found so interesting now felt trivial. The reports, the data, the endless meetings, none of it seemed important anymore. His thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra, to the warning she had given him, to the strange feeling he got whenever she was near. One afternoon, Jack found himself walking the hallways of the outpost, trying to clear his mind. The space was quiet, as it usually was. The low hum of the machinery was the only sound that filled the emptiness. As he passed Lyra's quarters, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. His heart skipped a beat, but he forced himself to keep walking. He had already done enough, but then, out of nowhere, Lyra appeared in front of him, her figure stepping out of her room, blocking his path. Her silver hair caught the light as she looked at him with those piercing blue eyes. There was something about her, something he couldn't explain, but it was like a magnetic force drawing him closer. "Jack," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "We need to talk." Jack's heart raced. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He had promised himself he wouldn't let this happen again, but now here she was, standing right in front of him. His mind was a mess of conflicting thoughts, and for a moment, he wasn't sure what to do. Lyra seemed to sense his hesitation. "Please," she continued, her tone almost pleading. "I need to explain. I didn't want things to go this far." Jack swallowed hard, his mind working overtime. He knew he should walk away, but his body wasn't listening. He couldn't bring himself to leave her standing there. Instead, he nodded slowly and followed her into her room. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a moment, the silence between them was deafening. Lyra stood near the center of the room, her posture tense, her eyes never leaving Jack's. "I shouldn't have come to you the way I did," Lyra said quietly, her voice tinged with regret. "I knew better, but the pairing season, it's stronger than anything I've ever felt before, and I didn't know how to control it." Jack didn't know what to say. He had never experienced anything like this. He had always been in control of his actions, his emotions, but this was different. He looked at Lyra, his gaze softening slightly. "I didn't understand," Jack said, his voice low. "I didn't understand what you were going through. But I'm trying to now. I just I don't know how to handle it." Lyra looked down for a moment, her eyes filled with something Jack couldn't quite read. "I've been struggling with this for days, Jack," she confessed. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable. But I can't ignore it anymore. My instincts are too strong." Jack felt a wave of sympathy for her, but at the same time, he knew he had to be careful. He couldn't let himself get swept up in this. He had to keep his distance, even if it was hard. "I don't want to hurt you either, Lyra," Jack said, his voice filled with honesty. "But I don't know how to help you with this." I don't understand how your species works, how this pairing season affects you. I'm just ... I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do." Lyra took a step closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. "You don't have to do anything, Jack," she said softly. "You just have to be here. That's all. I need you to understand that this isn't something I want. It's just what happens. And I don't want to push you away, but it's hard for me to fight it." Jack stood still, his mind racing. He could feel the pull, the attraction between them, and it terrified him. He had always prided himself on being able to think clearly, on being in control, but right now, he felt like he was losing himself. His heart was telling him one thing, his mind was telling him another. I can't let this happen," Jack said, his voice shaking. "I can't let myself get caught up in something I don't understand." Lyra seemed to sense the panic in his voice. She took a step back, her face falling. "I understand." "Jack," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make things so difficult. I just ... I don't know how else to deal with this." For a moment, there was silence between them. Jack's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. He wanted to help her, to make things right, but he didn't know how. He couldn't bring himself to let her go, but at the same time, he couldn't let things go any further. "I need time," Jack said finally, his voice firm. "I need to think about this. I can't make any decisions right now. I just ... need some time." Lyra nodded slowly, her expression filled with understanding. "I'll give you time, Jack. I won't push you, I promise." With that, Jack turned and walked toward the door. As he opened it, he paused for a moment, looking back at Lyra. There was a sadness in her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. It broke his heart to see her like this, but he knew he had to be strong. He had to figure out how to handle this. For both their sakes, he stepped out of her room and closed the door behind him. As he walked down the hallway, his thoughts were a jumble of emotions. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Things had changed, and there was no going back. Jack had no idea what would happen next, but he knew he couldn't ignore the pull between him and Lyra, and as much as he wanted to resist, he couldn't help but wonder if deep down, he was already in too deep. The days that followed were quieter, but the tension between Jack and Lyra never fully disappeared. Jack had locked his door every night since their last conversation, but the pull he felt toward her never went away. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about what she had said, and about the confusion that seemed to settle in his chest every time they were in the same room. Lyra had given him space, just as she promised, but it didn't make things easier. If anything, it made them harder to bear. Jack found himself walking the halls of the outpost late one evening, trying to clear his head. The stars outside the windows glowed faintly in the night sky, and the usual hum of the machinery sounded distant, almost soothing. He needed to make sense of everything. He needed to figure out what to do next. But every time he thought he had it all figured out, his mind would race back to Lyra, to her eyes, to the emotions she stirred in him. He stopped in front of Lyra's quarters, his feet moving on their own before his mind could catch up. He had been avoiding her for days, but now, he found himself standing at her door, unsure of what to do. Part of him wanted to turn around and leave, to go back to his room and pretend none of this had happened. But another part of him, the part he couldn't control, wanted to go inside, to talk to her, to figure out what was happening between them. Before he could second-guess himself, the door to Lyra's room slid open. She stood there, her expression unreadable. Her silver hair shimmered in the light, and her eyes, though calm, seemed to pierce through him. There was no denying the attraction between them now. It was undeniable, a force that neither of them could ignore. "Jack," Lyra said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "You came." Jack opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he stepped into her room, his heart pounding in his chest. The door slid shut behind him, and the air between them felt charged with electricity. It was impossible to ignore the way his body reacted to her presence. He wanted to back away, to pull away from the emotions rising within him, but he couldn't. "I'm sorry," Lyra said, her voice quieter now. "I know I've put you in a difficult position. I never wanted to make you feel this way. But I can't keep pretending that everything is normal when it's not." Jack took a deep breath. "It's not that simple, Lyra," he said, his voice low. "I don't understand all of this. I don't know how to deal with what you're going through. What I'm feeling, I never expected any of this to happen." Lyra stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face. "I know, I didn't expect this either. But it's real, Jack. The pairing season is real. And the feelings it brings, they don't go away. I can't control it, and neither can you." Jack swallowed, his heart beating faster. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew deep down that he was struggling with the same feelings. He felt a desire to pull her close, to hold her, but at the same time, fear and uncertainty kept him at a distance. His mind screamed at him to keep control, to stay strong, but his body was betraying him. I don't know what to do," Jack confessed, his voice shaky. "I've tried to fight this. I've tried to ignore it. But every time I see you, it's like I can't think straight. I don't know if I can handle this." Lyra reached out and gently touched his arm, her touch light but firm. "You don't have to handle it alone," she said softly. "You're not the only one struggling with this. I need you, Jack, more than you know." The words hit Jack like a wave, and he felt his resolve begin to crumble. He wanted to pull back, to keep this distance, but everything in him urged him to take a step forward. He looked into Lyra's eyes, and for the first time, he saw the vulnerability there, the raw emotion that mirrored his own. "I'm scared," Jack admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of what this could mean. I'm scared of losing control. I don't know what to do with these feelings." Lyra's gaze softened, and she took another step closer to him. "You don't have to be scared, Jack," she said gently. "I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to do. I just need you to understand that what I'm feeling isn't something I can ignore, and I need your help." Jack closed his eyes for a moment, taking in a slow breath. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, not sure whether to jump or to turn back. But the pull he felt toward her, the connection that was building between them, was undeniable. He couldn't deny it any longer. He couldn't keep running from it. "Okay," Jack said, his voice steady now. "Okay, I'll help you. But I need you to promise me something, Lyra." She looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "Promise me that." "We'll take this one step at a time," Jack said. "I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how this will end. But I want to figure it out. Together." Lyra smiled softly, her eyes filled with something that Jack couldn't quite describe. "I promise," she said. "We'll figure this out together." And in that moment, Jack realized that, despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty, he was ready to face whatever came next. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, he felt like he could navigate the unknown. With Lyra by his side, the tension between them hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. It was no longer an obstacle they had to overcome. It was something they could work through, together. Jack didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He couldn't walk away from Lyra. He had already made his choice, and whatever came next, he was ready to face it with her.